I know exactly what you're thinking. It's about time for you to start investigating and investing in IoT Edge. There are far too many enterprise problems waiting to be solved in that space. However, it's pretty tricky to talk to the hardware directly, let alone manage the whole pipeline that's given to you by Edge. But of course, we also know that there's Johnny 5 on the other side, right? This set of tooling that allows me to easily interact with hardware. How do we bring these things together? Well, we can. It's easy. It's there. Bryan's going to tell us all about it this episode of Dev Radio. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Dev Radio. I'm here with the one and only Bryan Hughes, one of my colleagues at Microsoft who loves developers almost as much as I do. He is a famous superhero in the JavaScript world. He's most famous perhaps because of his Johnny 5 project that he works on. Bryan, it is fantastic to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat more about all this.
Now, your world has actually shifted a little bit. You're an advocate now. That's your new title.
Yep. I'm a cloud developer advocate. Used to be, we were on the same team where we were evangelists, and there's a very fine line in the difference between being an advocate and evangelist. Mostly they're the same things. I think only a few people really care about the nitty-gritty differences.
I think only a very few people. That's exactly right. Those people will go to the mat on it, but everybody else doesn't even recognize the difference. That's totally true.
Yep.
All right, so let's think about it for a second. You're still a big fan of developers. You're still producing content to make sure you're still out there presenting. You're still making sure people understand. I don't know what's your world.
Yeah, basically all of that, and it's kind of a bit of a shift now on what I focus on. But at the end of the day, I'm here to help developers, and that means a bunch of different things. I talk about a wide variety of topics. Pretty much everything is based in JavaScript, though. Like that's sort of the core thread that runs through everything I do is JavaScript. Mostly on the server or on devices. So like I do a lot of Node.js work, especially with IoT. But I've also been known to dabble in some web stuff and React every now and then too.
All right, so I'm glad you said IoT because I think we're going to talk a lot about IoT. I think everybody knows that IoT stands for the funny thing stuck on stands for the Internet of Things. The big O should be little, right? And
Always.
The idea is anything that happens to be connected gets counted. Doesn't even have to be connected to the internet, oddly enough. It just has to be a connected device, even if it's internal. You started, however, pretty far back with the Johnny 5 project, interacting with these devices. Talk to me just a little bit about what was the impetus to even build a project like this? Was there a gap you were trying to fill?
Not exactly. It's much more of a meandering story than that. We got to go all the way back to when I first started college, almost 20 years ago now, that I think about it. And so I majored in electrical engineering. For a variety of reasons. And so I was doing hardware and stuff like that from a long time ago. And back then, hardware was really tough to work with. I first learned how to do hardware, programming in assembly, and then eventually I managed to graduate to C. And I was like, oh my God, this is so much easier. C, the easy language out of these. Just it was a very different world back then. But people have been doing these kind of embedded devices and even kind of connected-ish devices for a super long time. But they were very much the realm of very specific niche developers for a long time. It was just really hard to get involved. Just because the skills you needed, you basically had to have a graduate degree in electrical engineering like I have in order to do that kind of work.
And was that partly, it was so difficult to approach these devices, partly because there was no abstraction layer or anything like that? You were always writing directly down to the hardware.
Yep, that's exactly it. We didn't have the tooling to make it easier and the libraries and things like that. And they started coming out, when the Arduino was released in 2004, I think. That was a pretty big game changer because that was hey, we can create libraries that aren't, a total pain in the ass to use.
Yeah.
That was revolutionary, kind of in this world. But
and inexpensive. You had this universal capability that anybody could approach and just solve whatever problem you can dream up. And it didn't all of a sudden become a $100 device. You could buy these crazy inexpensive little boxes.
Yep. Yep. So it's all about like lowering barriers to entry and like getting more software developers into it, not just hardware developers. I was like, I'm going along through college. I graduate with the PhD, so I was in college for quite a while. And I graduated not long after the 2008 crash, and like jobs were a little scarcer. So eventually I was like, well, all right, I'll just go full software. I like software anyways.
Yeah.
And so kind of just I set that aside until, of all things, I went to a conference, actually. It was JSConf US in 2013. And that's when I first heard about the Johnny Five project back when it was like 6 months old. And they were showing it off in like some workshops and stuff like that. So I got to like play with it and made like, this little like popsicle stick thing with servos that can like wave around. Like, and it's very much adult Legos. It's like just playing. There's no real like production usefulness or whatever. It's just fun. But I was like, this is awesome. I want to like work on this.
2013, and think about it. 2013, not that long ago, but man, that was the beginning. Like things were just starting to show up. And Johnny Five, only 6 months. By the way, I heard your subtle reference to your PhD. That's nice. That's
I kind of humble brag a little bit,
That's right. That's right. So 6 months, the project's pretty young. You decide to get involved all the way back then. That's actually been quite a long time to be involved in a single project. I'm sure you've closed a few bugs by now.
Definitely gone through, and also like one major re-architecting, one minor. I'm actually about to start another major re-architecting. So I switched from using vanilla like ES5, like the version of JavaScript that's around with like IE8 and kind of like the really old, what we think of as really old browsers now. And it's now written like mostly in TypeScript to eventually get it all converted. So like, there's been huge changes to it. I don't think there's any code that is the same as what I originally committed.
Right. Well, that's funny to think, actually.
Yeah.
Wow. If you could find that one nugget that's still the so Johnny Five takes the idea of look, these devices are getting a lot easier for developers who understand just normal software languages. They don't have to write it in machine code or anything like that. And Johnny Five is bringing it to the JavaScript community?
Yep, that's exactly it. And the guy who first created it, a guy named Rick Waldron, he's done a lot of things over there. Like he's on TC39, so he helps to define the actual JavaScript language itself. He was really involved in jQuery back in the day. And the jQuery part's important because Johnny Five takes a lot of inspiration from jQuery. And I mean this in a good way, by the way. This is not...
No, I'm with you. It's not a humble nut brag on jQuery.
Yeah.
jQuery's awesome.
Yeah, it definitely served a purpose, especially like in the comparison. There's a lot of comparisons. It's like back when jQuery first came out, like all the browsers, they were different enough you really couldn't run your code once and have it run on all the browsers. And so
unlike
jQuery,
today when it's perfect.
yeah,
right,
99% of the time. And like so, jQuery papered over all those differences, and it was awesome for that. And like Johnny Five basically does the same thing except for hardware. Because like Johnny Five can run on a bunch of different platforms. It can run on the Raspberry Pi, which I maintain the Raspberry Pi support. That's my claim to fame.
Okay.
It runs on the Arduino. It runs on like BeagleBones, Tessels, Teensees. I'm going to forget like half of them. So I'm not even going to bother naming them because there's a bunch of platforms we support.
Now, is this the hardware abstraction layer that is identical across all the different platforms? So I write it for a Raspberry Pi. I just decide to go over to Arduino. It's the same experience for me, or is it? You tell me.
It's like 99.9% the same across all of them. The only thing that changes is just like pin numbers, because the actual pin numbers themselves are different across platforms.
Yeah.
But like that's the only thing you have to do. You have to say like, okay, instead of connected to pin 1 on this one device, maybe pin 1 doesn't support the thing you want to do. So it's like, all right, now it's on pin 5. But like, that's about it, really. And like if you're developing in kind of a smart way, you'll have like a config file with like some constants in there, and so like super easy to switch.
So that's pretty cool. Let me just get a feel for this. So now you've written this nice abstraction layer to the hardware, the IoT. This is the T part of IoT, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I can pick whichever hardware I want. Of course, there's going to be a step maybe to make it work just right for all the pins and whatever it is. Whatever's right for my company now, I can say Johnny Five, then the hardware you want. And it's not like saying like the SK I wrote is Jerry 5, and it requires you only to use, your Casio calculator. And so that's the only thing you can do. That's a bummer. You pick Johnny 5, you don't have this buyer's remorse of free software.
Yep.
Choose remorse.
Yep. And another thing we do that jQuery also does, in addition to like paper over those differences, there's a lot of like higher level abstractions too. So they tend to be more contextual. So if you look at Johnny 5, it's basically a whole bunch of classes that you can instantiate. But
Okay.
they're not like GPA open, I2C port. It's not like that level of abstraction that we might be kind of used to. It's like there's a button class. And the button class
Ah,
it will emit like a press event or a long press event, release events, like just like
wow.
DOM API. So it's like very high level. Like there's an LED class as well. We can go on, off, of course, but you can also set it to like strobe at a certain rate. You can even set it to like fade in. There's actually even an animation engine that you can like plug into it.
Ah,
There's
yeah.
like a thermometer class that emits like temperature read events. So it's like all abstracted and it handles all of that like parsing data from communication buses and stuff for you.
So if there's a slider on easy, you've slid it as high basically as you can.
Yep. Yep.
Ah, that is
That we
awesome.
have.
So now I just have a button and I don't even care about the hardware.
Uh-huh.
Talk to me about the type of hardware solution you've seen people use Johnny 5 for. Like, is this for a temperature sensor or is this for a small robot? I mean, I know it's Johnny 5 like the movie, which was but that was a
Yep,
long
yep.
time ago, man. I couldn't even think. It wasn't Johnny 5. The movie was Short Circuit, I think.
Yep, yep, and the
That,
robot was named Johnny 5.
yeah, that's right, because Johnny Five's alive.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
Yep,
That's
yep.
right.
Oh, I totally
Okay,
grew up
so
watching
what
those
kind of
movies.
things have you seen people do? I'm sure you've seen an awesome
Mhm.
variety of usage.
Oh, I've seen such a variety. Like it definitely started off in the kind of like DIY makerspace. Let's just experiment and see what we can do. So like lots of robots. I've seen people make like six-legged spiders that can like walk around controlled by like old joysticks. It's just like all sorts of like fun stuff. I saw someone who created I forget what's exactly called, but basically a pin plotter. So the type of thing where you put like a marker in it and it'll draw things around and you'll swap out markers and it create
Well,
like
that's
color
cool.
images.
Yeah, yeah.
There's an official name for it. I forget, but
Okay.
I've seen that. But I've also seen more, maybe not as like flashy, showy, but useful. So like if you look, actually my video right now, there's an aquarium right behind me. I think you might
Uh-huh.
be able to see it on the screen. It's powered by Johnny. The lighting in it is powered by Johnny 5, and the temperature is monitored by Johnny 5 as well.
All right. So it's not just, it's for a second there I'm like, "Oh, this is a hackathon solution." But no, it sounds like there's actually real-world applications as well.
Yeah, it definitely started in that, but like as the product has matured and as more people, a big part of it has been also like when this first came out, it was like, oh, JavaScript on hardware? Wait, no, you write in C. Only serious hardware people use anything.
Those are the C developers talking like that.
No, basically, well, that's all there was back then. Like the idea of using even Python was still a new idea, and people were like, ooh, Python on devices. You know, and so like the world has changed a lot, and I think as that's happened, as the project has matured, and as the IoT space has grown too, is a big part of it. Yeah, we're starting to see more and more kind of like production level stuff coming out.
That's really cool. Now, talk to me a little bit more. When I say abstraction layer, it may not be a fair way of describing Johnny 5, but it feels a little bit kind of like that because it sounds like you're abstracting even all the way up to a button. So that's pretty cool. Is there a downside to Johnny 5? At first, you know, when I say abstraction layer, I think of like Windows has a hardware abstraction layer. It doesn't have a performance impact at all, you know. And then sometimes I see an abstraction layer and I'm like, oh, that does have a where does Johnny 5 fit in on the spectrum of you won't even know it's there to there's things you have to know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely on the things you have to know, especially on the performance side. And part of that is just Node itself. Node is not the most performant thing in embedded systems. Like you know, V8 itself was
that's
built.
great. Talk about courage to say that.
Right.
I'm recording right now.
Well, a lot of this comes from just V8 and the design goals for V8. Like Google never designed V8 to run on super tiny class hardware. Like your performance constraints are different. Yeah, you know, with V8 they really wanted, you know, really fast number crunching. They were looking at CPU performance almost exclusively. And then, of course, they want to make sure the memory wasn't bad, but they're like, you know what, if it takes 8 megs of RAM on startup, that's okay, which is how much it takes, by the way. Now, when your device itself only has 8 megs, if you're lucky, or especially if it's 4 megs or 2 megs, you know, you can't even load V8 on that device, like, at all. And
so what do you do?
Well, there's a couple of approaches, and Johnny 5 has like 2 different fundamental ways of operating. There's what we call onboard. So for things like Raspberry Pi that has, you know, hundreds of megs of memory, you're just running Linux, you run Node directly. It's, you know, just like running Node on your laptop, except you also have hardware ports. But then for the Arduino, which is and has 16 kilobytes of RAM, I think, if I remember right. I know it's a 16 megahertz processor. It might be 32 kilobytes of RAM. In any case, we're talking like that kind of thing.
Tight.
No way V8's running it. Like not even remotely close. You've got to run C. You can only run C on that device.
Got it.
So what we do is we use this other project called Fermata, different open source project that's a little lower level. It's all written in C, and it's basically a server that runs on the Arduino, and that you can send it commands. Now they have a custom packet format. It's not like HTTP, but basically you're just sending these commands to a server that's listening. That's like, set this pin high, set this into input mode, and then
it works like a proxy for Johnny 5 on those devices. And so the idea is, if I had a farm full of sensors in my gardens, then I would have a central one that controls all of them, and I can use that in a language that doesn't make all my developers unhappy.
Yep.
Okay, that's actually an awesome solution. All right, let me derail this for a second. So I know we have Johnny 5. Johnny 5 brings IoT to the JavaScript developer in so many great ways. Now Microsoft has a lot of stuff, and as we kind of go through the spectrum of what Microsoft has, we have the IoT Hub where everything gets dumped into Azure at an unbelievable rate, and you can't clog this drain, right? I mean, that's the idea. But over here, we also have another thing that says we might need to do a lot of stuff on board around IoT Edge. For people who are developers listening and they don't know, like, this IoT Edge, it sounds like it's just another IoT Hub, but it's not. It's totally different. Tell me what IoT Edge is.
So this is the way I describe it, which I think kind of differs from the marketing some. But the way I describe it is like IoT Edge is a managed runtime that makes it easier for us to deploy and run code on device. Essentially, it's Docker with a bunch of really nice tools around it. It allows us to run multiple Docker images at once on a device. And then also has ways for these to communicate. So the idea is that, most of the things that we tend to want to do have been solved before. Like, we just need this generic thing to do a thing. So what IoT Edge makes it really easy to do is we'll say, like, oh, I want a module that can do, like, facial recognition. Let me just pull that module in, stick it in real quick. Right? And I needed this module that'll do this other thing. And so you can pull in pre-built modules and mix them with your own custom modules. And they can talk to each other in different ways, but they're kind of sitting on their own, managed on their own, updated on their own, and they can be
isolated completely. The internet can go down, and they keep functioning. I mean, that's the value, right? And not only that, you don't need to rely on Stream Analytics to do everything for it. Like, when temperature is above 100, then you don't need that in Stream. But you could bring it down to IoT Edge Stream Analytics. You could do it here on this machine, and I think a lot of developers, when they picture IoT Edge, they're like, oh my gosh, I've got this tiny little temperature little device, and you're wanting me to run Docker on that? Are you crazy? Are you crazy, Brian? Why would you run Docker on this tiny little thing? It doesn't run on that, though, does it? That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's actually going back to, well, the kind of thing we're talking about with Johnny 5, where you have more of a central unit that's still on-premise, but is a more powerful thing. I guess it could be like, a Raspberry Pi, or perhaps even a server itself, like an actual full desktop computer of some sort, that then talks to super tiny, low-powered stuff elsewhere. And it's called Edge because it sort of sits on the edge between these two things. And it itself can act as a proxy. So
now,
that way,
wait a minute, Brian. Just a couple of weeks/months ago, I was working for a very large retailer through Microsoft, and I built a system on IoT Edge that watched their refrigerators and actually looked for the temperature change. I wrote all of that in C#. It was all .NET Core. I mean, I was living the dream, but I didn't see a JavaScript option there. Is JavaScript an option in IoT Edge?
It absolutely is. Yes. Last time I looked, it wasn't quite as well documented. So, but it absolutely is there, and I believe we're pretty close to one-to-one parity in terms of like what's actually available through the SDK.
That's 100% we are. You're absolutely right. The SDK is totally available.
But
now, earlier we were talking about Johnny 5. Now I have this awesome thing where I can, inside my company I can have IoT Edge. It's basically saying I can have some of the logic that I would rely on Azure down locally, and then pass the heavy workloads up to Azure if I wanted to. Why are we talking about both of these?
And we're talking about both because they fit naturally together, and that's something that I did. I kind of brought them together. So, like, we talk about Azure IoT Edge and like all the cool stuff you can do. We're talking about, you got your Docker containers and all this. You can be, offline or sometimes offline scenarios, and you can do automatic synchronization with the cloud when you come back online, like all this cool stuff. But this is all like network communication stuff. We're never actually talking about and here's how you use IoT Edge to, turn an LED on and off. Like, so how do you do that?
IoT Edge gives you the containers and gives you the pipeline through those containers, but it doesn't say, here's how you actually talk to this stuff, which is harder than just obvious.
Yeah. Yep, and Johnny 5, the whole point of Johnny 5 is it makes it not harder than obvious. It actually makes it pretty obvious. So it's like,
Yeah.
we should put these two together. They're like perfectly made for each other. Yeah, especially in those scenarios where you've got like, maybe a beefier Raspberry Pi or something talking to a bunch of like tiny little Arduinos. Like Johnny 5 already does that. That's just part of the architecture. So like their architectures, they map so beautifully. And so I was like, we got to bring these together.
Is this Johnny 6? What are you going to do?
We have a much more boring name than that. It's
Okay.
Johnny 5 IoT Edge. Open to
Did you
name
have
suggestions.
Microsoft marketing name that? That is great. That is terrific.
No, I named it, and I think I'm about as bad as they are. I am self-described as being notoriously bad at naming things. So, hardest problem in computer science, right?
That's right. What's your Twitter handle again?
Nebrius, Nebrius.
That's difficult. That's a difficult name. But what does that mean?
It is. So the story goes, I was in college. I was like, you know what? I need to get some kind of online handle, originally for gaming.
And make it unique so you can get the domain.
So I literally just started reading through kind of like a dictionary of scientific names for animals. And I was just like, I had certain aesthetic requirements. And I found this one. This is part of the genus for a tiny nurse shark. Like, didn't even care about the animal. I was like,
nice.
like a little
dangerous
shark.
yet not life-threatening.
Yeah, but this was totally not dangerous. As it turns out. Yeah, they're just
okay. So now you're in this. You've lived in the open source world actually for a long time. I think a lot of people who they see that open source things are happening. They hear that Microsoft has all these open source projects as well, and they wonder, is this just kind of or just lip service? But Microsoft's pretty deep in the open source world, giving away an amazing amount of things to people who can also contribute right back to it. Aren't you amazed how the open source community actually, it really does work? Like, it's not just like crazy communism. Like, for some reason, pull requests flow into these projects.
Absolutely. And like, so I created the Raspberry Pi support for Johnny 5, which I call Raspberry IO. But I'm not the only contributor. I think I've had maybe a dozen other people contribute, and this is a relatively small project in the grand scheme of things. And I still had a number of contributors and stuff like that. And Johnny 5's had over 100. And then that's, to say nothing of the Node project itself, which I was involved in, which I think there are like over 2,000 contributors now, last time I looked.
Wow.
So yeah, like tons of people come in. And a lot of times it's stuff like, I'm trying to use this. It's not quite working for me. It's missing, that one feature, because there's always that one feature is missing. And so it's like, well, it's open source. I'll just add it. And then they get to use your product as opposed to something that's closed source where it's like, well, you don't quite have that one feature. Now I got to go to a competitor.
That's right. And and somebody might say in their mind, oh, this is open source. I can't really trust it because Bryan could change all the APIs and all of a sudden it would break. Like, dude, just clone it. You're done. Like, it's incredible. Like, you could really solve these problems in beautiful ways, and you could be part of the community and things as well. So, Johnny 5 for IoT Edge. This allows me to take Johnny 5, run it on the IoT Edge device that is running the entire container service, and does it mean that my containers now, all the code inside them need to be JavaScript?
Nope, and that's one of the things I'm most excited about this project for.
Okay.
And for the record, this is still pretty early, not quite beta ready.
We're recording this just as we're almost into October, just in case somebody's watching this.
Yeah.
Of 2018, by the way. Who knows?
Yeah, so hopefully we're going to
so it's a little early.
It's a little early. It's definitely stable and usable right now. We just don't have the whole Johnny 5 API represented. But yeah, the cool thing about it is we're doing this very much in the Azure IoT Edge way, in that it's using device twins, which is the same thing in IoT Hub, which is basically a way of like configuring your device. And
While it's offline.
While it's offline. And you can like synchronize that, and when it comes back online, like there's a lot of cool stuff in device twins. But like we make use of those. We make use of like invoking direct methods, which can be like a cloud to device thing if you want. It could also be device to device. But it's all just traditional stuff, which means you can call it from anything. So you can write all your app logic in C# if you want, and still make use of this module to talk to hardware, which is one of the things I'm so excited about, because Johnny 5, of course, is JavaScript only, and this is how we get Johnny 5 to non-JavaScript users.
That is an incredible story, actually. And of course, JavaScript or C# isn't the only other option as well on IoT Edge. But what a cool thing to be able to, if you embrace what's already there, it's a lot easier. The IoT Edge team, are they writing part of this implementation, or is this full open source on your plate?
pretty much entirely on my plate. I've had a couple
All
other
right.
folks help me from actually our previous org. We definitely shown it to the IoT Edge team. They're like, oh, that's really cool. So they're into it.
Uh,
But they're not really involved in
what are
developing
their
the
names? Tell me
frequency.
their name. Tell me Paul's name. Start with Paul's name.
Yeah, so Paul DiCarlo worked on this. Rachel Weil worked on this. Like the three of us have been kind of some of the core folks, especially online. But there's two other folks, and I'm forgetting their names, and I feel really terrible now.
Everybody else. I'm gonna force you to stop that way if you can't remember. It's my fault. All right, so Johnny 5 is the application is a hardware abstraction for JavaScript users, and then over here we have this other thing called IoT Edge, which allows us to bring a lot of the logic out of the cloud into a local environment. So even if it's offline, it can still run. We've talked on this show actually to customers who've run it on their drones while they're way out where and can make all these kinds of decisions that they can't deal with the latency back to the cloud. And so we have IoT Edge for that. What if we somehow had a baby? What would we call that? We'd call it Johnny 5 for IoT Edge, and all of a sudden I have hardware abstraction on IoT Edge, and it's not like a brand new paradigm you've got to go learn. It's built intentionally adopting and kind of embracing the IoT Edge paradigm that already exists today.
Yep, exactly.
Every language. Johnny 5 is only for JavaScript developers. And Johnny 5, which we should call Johnny 6, I realize, but Johnny 5 for IoT Edge, wow, that's awesome. Every type of language developer can also use it. If you can write for IoT Edge, it's available to you.
Yep.
That's a pretty sweet project. When are you going to take off preview and say it's a GA?
Whenever I get around to implementing more.
Does that make you nervous? Is that terrifying? Like,
not really. I've got to do some
800,000 users now. You're like, oh. Every time you push a new version, you're like, let's hope this works.
Yeah, well, there's like testing and like, TypeScript has helped out tremendously with this.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. Because it's like hardware's a weird thing. Like writing unit tests for hardware it's tricky because there's certain things you're doing that you can only test from hardware. Okay. Like, did I set the frequency on this output signal correctly? Like, you can't tell that from software. So you can't. Yeah, you got to look at it. So it's like, how do you do unit tests? That's tricky. And so the answer in practice oftentimes is, I just don't write unit tests for certain things.
yeah. And you just kind of manually see if it works.
Yep, I do have some integration tests I run manually. But like TypeScript helps a lot. Yeah, but like TypeScript helps so much with this because like that catches certain classes of errors before it even gets unit tests.
That is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. So it's even more valuable. It is.
All right, Bryan. This has been awesome. Like, I have to say, I always have known that JohnnyScript was on what's it called again?
Johnny 5.
Oh yeah, Johnny 6. That's why. That's not why. I always knew that Johnny 5 was on your resume. I mean, I really did. And I was like, what is that thing he keeps doing? And then, of course, I understand IoT Edge, of course, as well. And boy, the lights are all on right now. I can absolutely see taking away a lot of the complexity, honestly, that we have to introduce on the IoT Edge side, just scooping that away, dropping in something that already works, that we already know, kind of already trust, and maybe even already have experience with because we've been doing Johnny 5 stuff in other parts of our life, right? It's pretty cool as well. So now they're together, and we'll create a link. You created a link. It's aka ms/ Johnny J08 in NY. That might trick somebody. Yeah. -5 -IoT -Edge.
Yep.
All right.
And the word 5, F-I-V-E, not the number.
And then,
I totally see people going
not
like,
to be
that's number 5.
With Nebrius.
They lied to me.
That's right. We'll make sure the link is in the description of the show as well, so people won't get it wrong. And it's at Nebrius. If you go to Twitter, we can find you and just kind of ask you for all kinds of technical support on your library. And that's great when people ask you on Twitter. That's why GitHub exists. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I have my own project.
GitHub issues, always good.
Yeah. Bryan, this is great. Hey, congratulations on the new position, Cloud Developer Advocate. That's awesome. Great job in basically just like rocking it with Johnny 5 as well and bringing it over to all these Edge developers. A lot of developers who are watching the show right now don't even know that they're going to be IoT Edge developers soon, and they feel like, how will I ever really write on a tiny little device? That's not what it's about. You're writing in a specific context that eventually flows into Hub. It's pretty awesome, and it's pretty clean, and now we have even more capabilities thanks to guys like you. Thanks, Bryan. It's been a great show.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks.